My name is Elliot Crane, and I've been married to a stranger for 15 years. That's not some poetic metaphor about growing apart or losing the spark. I mean it literally. The woman sleeping next to me every night, making coffee in my kitchen, wearing my grandmother's wedding ring. She's become someone I don't recognize. Someone who thinks I'm too stupid to notice what she's been doing. It started on a Tuesday morning in February. Maine winters have a way of making everything feel gray and hopeless, but that particular morning felt different. Nora had left her iPad on the kitchen counter while she showered, and a text notification popped up on the screen. Last night was incredible. Can't wait for Thursday. Bring the handcuffs this time. L. I stared at that message for maybe 30 seconds, my coffee growing cold in my hand. The shower was still running upstairs. Steam was probably fogging up our bathroom mirror, the same mirror where Nora practiced her concerned wife face every morning before asking how I slept. The funny thing? I wasn't shocked. Surprised, maybe, but not shocked. There had been signs for months. Late nights at the gym, new underwear I'd never seen, the way she'd started putting her phone face down during dinner. I'd chalked it up to a midlife phase, maybe some harmless flirting with her trainer. Turns out I was half right. I took a screenshot before the message disappeared. Then I sat down and thought about my options. Option 1. Confront her immediately. Storm upstairs, wave the evidence in her face, demand explanations and apologies. Watch her cry, maybe throw some things, probably blame me for not being attentive enough. Then what? Counseling? Forgiveness? A messy divorce where she'd claim emotional neglect and walk away with half of everything I'd built? Option 2. Wait. Watch. Learn exactly what I was dealing with before making any moves. I chose option 2. When Nora came downstairs 20 minutes later, hair still damp and smelling like that expensive shampoo she'd started buying, I was reading the newspaper like nothing had happened. "Morning, honey," she said, kissing the top of my head. "Sleep well?" "Like a baby," I replied, not looking up from the sports section. "You seem energetic today." She laughed, and it sounded almost genuine. "New workout routine. Really gets the endorphins flowing." "That's great, sweetheart. I'm happy you found something you enjoy." And I was happy in a twisted way, because now I knew exactly what game we were playing. Over the next few weeks, I became a student of my wife's deception. I learned that L was Lucas Reed, a personal trainer at her gym who'd recently expanded into life coaching. I learned that their Thursday sessions weren't happening at the gym. I learned that Nora had become quite the actress, perfecting her performance as the devoted wife who just wanted to get back in shape. The best part? She thought she was so clever. "Elliot, would you mind if I started staying later at the gym on Thursdays?" she asked one evening in March, curled up next to me on the couch we'd bought together 7 years ago. "Lucas thinks I'd benefit from some extended cardio sessions." "Of course not," I said, stroking her hair. "Whatever makes you happy." She practically purred. "You're so understanding. I love that about you." I loved that about me, too. Understanding was going to be very useful in the coming months. By April, I had a complete picture of Nora's double life. She was meeting Lucas twice a week at a motel outside town. She'd told her friends at work that she was exploring her options, but needed to be strategic about any major life changes. She'd even started researching divorce attorneys, though she hadn't contacted any yet. Smart woman. She wanted to make sure she had her ducks in a row before pulling the trigger. Unfortunately for Nora, I was arranging my own ducks. The first step was encouraging her to quit her job. She'd been complaining about her boss for months, calling him a micromanaging control freak who didn't appreciate her contributions to the company. Every time she came home frustrated, I listened sympathetically and suggested maybe it was time to find something better. "You're too talented for that place," I told her one evening, after she'd spent 20 minutes ranting about a meeting that could have been an email. "Maybe this is the universe telling you to make a change." "I've been thinking the same thing," she admitted. but the timing feels scary. What if I can't find something else right away? We'll figure it out, I assured her. I make enough to cover our expenses for a while. Think of it as an investment in your happiness. She quit 3 weeks later, citing burnout and a desire to explore new opportunities. Her last day was May 15th. She celebrated by spending the weekend at a spa with her friend Madison, though I knew she was actually at a bed and breakfast 2 hours north with Lucas. The credit card receipts told a different story than her carefully crafted social media posts. With Nora unemployed, the financial dynamics of our marriage shifted quickly. Her severance package was decent, but I encouraged her to use it for things she'd been wanting: a wardrobe refresh, some home improvements, maybe a small vacation. She deserved to enjoy herself after years of corporate stress. "Are you sure?" she asked when I suggested she book that trip to Boston she'd been talking about. "It seems like a lot of money for just a weekend." "You've earned it," I said, kissing her forehead. "Besides, what's the point of having money if we don't use it to make ourselves happy?" She booked the trip that afternoon. Lucas, according to his very public Instagram account, happened to be in Boston that same weekend for a fitness conference. By summer, Nora was completely financially dependent on me. Her severance was gone, spent on clothes and trips and dinners at expensive restaurants, where she was definitely not eating alone. She'd made a few half-hearted attempts at job hunting, but nothing that suggested any real urgency about returning to work. "I'm thinking about taking some time to really figure out what I want to do next," she told me in July, lying on a beach chair in our backyard. "Maybe go back to school, or start my own business." "That sounds exciting," I replied, not mentioning that our joint savings account, the one she hadn't looked at in months, was now entirely in my name. A simple account restructuring for tax purposes, according to the paperwork she'd signed without reading. "You're so supportive," she said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "I'm lucky to have a husband who believes in me." "I believe in us," I corrected her, squeezing back. It wasn't entirely a lie. I believed in us. I just had a different definition of what us meant than she did. August brought new developments in the Lucas situation. According to the text messages I was now regularly monitoring, Nora had made the mistake of using the same password for everything. Their relationship was getting more serious. Lucas was talking about the future, about how they deserved to be happy, about how Nora shouldn't have to settle for a life that wasn't fulfilling her. "He makes me feel alive again," she'd written to her friend Tammy. "Like I'm not just going through the motions anymore." Reading those messages should have hurt more than it did. Instead, I felt something closer to satisfaction. Every declaration of love, every plan they made, every moment they thought they were building towards something, it was all happening exactly as I needed it to. September was when things got interesting. Nora started talking about marriage counseling. "I've been thinking," she said one evening over dinner, "maybe we should talk to someone. About us, I mean. I feel like we've been drifting apart lately." I looked up from my plate, giving her my full attention. "Really? I hadn't noticed, but if you think it would help, I'm open to it. You wouldn't mind? I know therapy isn't really your thing." "If it's important to you, it's important to me," I said. "Should I look into finding someone?" "Actually, I already have a few names," she replied quickly. "I can make some calls tomorrow." Of course she did. Because marriage counseling wasn't about saving our relationship, it was about building her case for why our relationship couldn't be saved. She needed documentation of my unwillingness to change, my emotional unavailability, my failure to meet her needs. She needed a professional witness to testify that she'd tried everything before filing for divorce. The woman was thorough. I had to give her that. We started seeing Dr. Patricia Hoffman the first week of October. She was a pleasant woman in her 50s with a gentle manner and an expensive office overlooking the harbor. Nora had chosen well. Dr. Hoffman specialized in helping couples navigate major life transitions, including the end of marriages. "What brings you both here today?" Dr. Hoffman asked during our first session. Nora launched into a carefully prepared speech about feeling disconnected, about how we'd grown into different people with different goals. She spoke about feeling unheard, unsupported in her career ambitions, lonely despite being married. I listened attentively, nodding at appropriate moments, occasionally reaching over to touch her hand. "Elliot," Dr. Hoffman said when Nora finished, "how do you respond to what Nora's shared?" "I had no idea she was feeling this way," I said, letting just enough hurt creep into my voice. I thought I was being supportive by encouraging her to take time off, to figure out what she really wanted. But if that made her feel unheard, then I clearly misunderstood what she needed from me. Nora's eyes softened slightly. For a moment, I think she almost felt guilty. "Communication is often the first casualty when couples start growing apart," Dr. Hoffman observed. "The good news is that recognizing the problem is the first step toward addressing it." We scheduled weekly sessions. I played the role of the well-meaning but clueless husband perfectly, eager to improve, slightly defensive but willing to listen, confused by Nora's dissatisfaction but committed to understanding it. Nora played the role of the patient wife who'd finally reached her breaking point after years of trying to make things work. Dr. Hoffman ate it up. October became November. The trees around our house turned brilliant shades of red and gold before dropping their leaves in our yard, creating a carpet that crunched under our feet when we walked to the car together. Nora and Lucas were now talking about her filing for divorce after the holidays. She wanted to give us one last Christmas together, she told him, for the sake of closure. How thoughtful of her. November became December, and Nora's performance as the conflicted wife reached new heights. She was attentive and affectionate at home, asking about my day and cooking my favorite meals. She decorated the house for Christmas with more enthusiasm than she'd shown in years, hanging lights and arranging garlands like she was creating memories to sustain her through the difficult times ahead. She was also meeting Lucas 3 times a week now, and their text conversations had evolved from romantic to practical. They were making concrete plans, where she'd live after the divorce, how they'd handle the transition, when they'd go public with their relationship. "I need to be smart about this," she'd written to him in early December. "Elliot's a good man, just not the right man for me anymore. If I handle this carefully, we can both move on without destroying each other." A good man, not the right man. How magnanimous of her to acknowledge my basic decency while planning to dismantle my life. Christmas morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of bitter wind that cuts right through your jacket. Nora had bought me a new watch, expensive, classic, the kind of gift a loving wife gives her husband. I'd bought her a necklace she'd been admiring for months, a delicate gold chain with a small diamond pendant. "It's beautiful," she said, letting me fasten it around her neck. "Thank you." "You deserve beautiful things," I replied, kissing the spot where the chain rested against her collarbone. She leaned into me for a moment, and I wondered if she was having second thoughts. If some part of her remembered why she'd married me in the first place, before Lucas and his promises of excitement and passion had turned her head. Then her phone buzzed with a text, and the moment passed. "Sorry," she said, glancing at the screen. "Madison's having some drama with her family. I should probably call her later." Madison. Right. Madison, who was currently posting pictures of her family Christmas dinner on social media, while Nora's phone displayed a message from Lucas wishing her a Merry Christmas and promising to make all her dreams come true in the new year. "Of course," I said. "Family drama doesn't take holidays." "You're so understanding," she said again, that phrase she'd been using more and more lately. "I really don't deserve you." Finally, something we could agree on. January arrived with a blizzard that buried our small Maine town under 2 feet of snow. The roads were impassable for 3 days, which meant Nora couldn't get to the gym for her regular sessions with Lucas. She paced the house like a caged animal, checking her phone constantly and making increasingly creative excuses to step outside for fresh air. I think I'm getting cabin fever, she announced on the second day, staring out the window at the endless white landscape. We could build a snowman, I suggested from my spot on the couch, where I was reading a book about investment strategies. Or have a movie marathon. Maybe later, she said, distracted. I should probably return some calls first. She disappeared into our bedroom for an hour, speaking in hushed tones to someone who definitely wasn't Madison or any of her other friends. When she emerged, she seemed calmer but restless, like someone who'd received reassurance but was still anxious about the future. The snow finally melted enough for normal life to resume, and Nora immediately booked a session with Lucas. She came home from the gym glowing with renewed energy and purpose. I've been thinking about our conversation with Dr. Hoffman last week, she said over dinner that night, about how we both need to be honest about what we want from this marriage. Dr. Hoffman had indeed encouraged us to examine our expectations and communicate our needs more clearly. It was standard relationship counseling advice, but Nora was treating it like a revelation that justified whatever she was planning to do next. What conclusions have you reached? I asked, cutting my steak with deliberate precision. I think, she said carefully, we need to consider the possibility that we've grown into incompatible people, that maybe the loving thing to do would be to admit that and give each other the freedom to find happiness elsewhere. There it was, the opening move in her endgame. That's a big step, I said, not looking up from my plate. Are you sure that's what you want? I don't know, she replied, and she almost sounded sincere. But I think we owe it to ourselves to explore all our options. Including divorce? The word hung in the air between us like a challenge. Nora's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Including divorce, she confirmed quietly. I nodded slowly, as if processing this information for the first time. If that's really how you feel, then I suppose we should talk to lawyers, figure out what that would look like. Relief flooded her face so quickly she couldn't hide it. You're not angry? I'm sad, I said, which was true in its own way. But if you're not happy, then staying married isn't fair to either of us. She reached across the table and took my hand. I know this is hard, but maybe it's the right thing for both of us. Maybe it is, I agreed. That night she called Lucas and told him I'd agreed to explore divorce as an option. She was careful to frame it as a mutual decision, something we'd arrived at together through careful consideration and honest communication. She painted me as understanding and cooperative, a decent man who wanted her to be happy even if it meant ending our marriage. She had no idea how understanding I was about to become. The next morning, I made a phone call of my own. Crane Construction. This is Roy speaking. Roy Martinez had been my foreman for 8 years, and my friend for longer than that. He was the kind of man who showed up early, worked late, and never asked questions when I needed a favor. Roy, it's Elliot. I need you to do something for me, and I need you to keep it between us. Sure thing, boss. What do you need? I'm going to be making some changes to my financial accounts over the next few weeks. If anyone asks, and I mean anyone including Nora, you don't know anything about it. There was a pause. Roy had met Nora plenty of times at company barbecues and Christmas parties. He'd always been polite to her, but I'd noticed the way his expression tightened whenever she made comments about me needing to be more ambitious or social. Everything okay? He asked. It will be, I said. I just need to make sure I'm protected if things go south. You got it. Anything else? Actually, yes. I'm going to need you to document some conversations over the next few months. Times, dates, witnesses present. Can you handle that without asking why? Consider it done. Roy was a good man. More importantly, he was a loyal man who understood that sometimes the details mattered more than the big picture. Over the next 2 weeks, I quietly restructured my financial life. The joint checking account that Nora hadn't looked at in months was converted to an individual account with my name only. The savings account followed suit. The investment accounts, the retirement funds, the business accounts. Everything moved into my sole control. It was all perfectly legal. As the primary breadwinner and account holder, I had every right to make these changes. The paperwork was complex enough that anyone glancing at it would see official-looking documents about account optimization and tax efficiency, nothing that screamed, preparing for divorce. Nora signed everything I put in front of her without reading it. "More financial stuff?" she asked one evening, scrawling her signature on the last page of a document that removed her from our primary savings account. "Just some year-end tax preparation," I said. "Our accountant wants to restructure a few things before April." "Thank God you handle all of this," she said, handing the papers back to me. "Numbers make my brain hurt." "I don't mind," I replied. "I like taking care of you." And I did like taking care of her. I was taking very good care of her indeed. February brought more therapy sessions and more careful conversations about our future. Dr. Hoffman was helping us explore our options with professional neutrality, but I could tell she was already mentally preparing for our inevitable separation. Nora had been laying groundwork for weeks, describing me as emotionally distant and uninterested in personal growth. "Elliot seems resistant to examining his role in your marital difficulties," Dr. Hoffman observed during one session. "How does that make you feel, Nora?" "Frustrated," Nora replied, glancing at me with what looked like genuine sadness. "I feel like I'm doing all the work here." "I'm trying," I protested mildly. "But I guess I don't understand what you want me to change." "That's exactly the problem," Nora said. "You don't see what needs to change." Dr. Hoffman nodded sympathetically. "This is a common dynamic in couples therapy. One partner recognizes the need for growth and change, while the other partner feels attacked or misunderstood." I let them paint me as the obtuse husband who couldn't grasp his wife's emotional needs. It was a role I played well, and it served my purposes perfectly. Every session built a stronger case for Nora's eventual claim that she'd tried everything to save our marriage. Meanwhile, I was building a case of my own. The private investigator I'd hired in January was thorough and discreet. Janet Morrison was a former police detective who specialized in matrimonial investigations, and she provided exactly the kind of documentation I needed. Photos of Nora and Lucas entering and leaving the motel, credit card records showing purchases at restaurants and hotels, phone records detailing the frequency and duration of their calls. But the real treasure was the audio recording. Janet had managed to plant a small recording device in Nora's car during one of her gym sessions. The conversation it captured was enlightening. "I feel terrible about lying to him," Nora's voice said, tinny but clear through the device's small speaker. "You're not lying," Lucas replied. "You're protecting him from information that would hurt him unnecessarily. But he's being so understanding about the divorce. Maybe I should just tell him the truth." "And what would that accomplish?" "You'd destroy his self-esteem for no reason. This way he gets to think the marriage just didn't work out. Nobody's the villain." "I suppose you're right." "I know I'm right. You're handling this perfectly. By the time everything's finalized, you'll both be free to move on with your lives." "I love you," she said. "I love you too. And soon, we won't have to hide it anymore." I listened to that recording 3 times before filing it away with the rest of my evidence. Soon we wouldn't have to hide anything anymore. Nora was absolutely right about that. March arrived with the first hints of spring, and Nora's divorce timeline accelerated. She'd consulted with an attorney, discreetly, she thought, though Janet had photographed her entering and leaving the law office. She'd also started looking at apartments, browsing rental listings online and bookmarking places that would be suitable for a newly single woman starting over. "I've been thinking about what we discussed in therapy," she said one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. "About maybe taking some time apart to figure out what we really want." "A trial separation?" I asked. "Something like that. Just to give us both some space to think clearly." "Where would you go?" "I found a few apartments I could afford," she said, which was interesting since she had no income and no access to any accounts with significant balances. Nothing fancy, but enough for now. How would you pay for it? I asked gently. You haven't found a job yet. She paused, clearly not having expected that question. I have some money saved up, and I could always get a part-time position somewhere while I figure out my next career move. Of course, I said. Whatever you think is best. What she thought was best, according to her text messages with Lucas, was filing for divorce in April and moving in with him temporarily while she got back on her feet. Lucas had assured her that he made enough money to support them both during the transition, and that she deserved to be taken care of after years of being unappreciated. It was a solid plan. It might have even worked under different circumstances. Unfortunately for Nora, circumstances were about to change dramatically. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning in late March. Nora had gone to the grocery store to pick up ingredients for dinner, something she'd been doing more often lately as part of her performance as the devoted wife who was trying to make our marriage work. Her card was declined. She called me from the store, confusion clear in her voice. Honey, there's something wrong with our credit card. The machine says it was declined. That's weird, I said. Maybe there's a problem with the magnetic strip. Try the other card. The other card was declined too. I don't understand, she said. Is there some kind of hold on our accounts? Let me call the bank, I offered. Sometimes they flag unusual activity as potential fraud. I'll get it sorted out. I called her back 20 minutes later with an explanation that was both true and completely misleading. Good news and bad news, I said. The good news is that it's not fraud. The bad news is that our accounts have been frozen as part of a routine audit. Something about irregular transfer patterns triggering their security protocols. How long will that take to resolve? A few days, maybe a week. I'll go down there tomorrow and straighten everything out. In the meantime, I can cover the groceries when I get home. Okay, she said, but I could hear the worry in her voice. This is really inconvenient timing. I know. I'm sorry. The accounts weren't frozen, of course. They were simply no longer joint accounts, and Nora no longer had access to them. But she wouldn't discover that until she tried to check our balances online, which she rarely did. That evening, I brought home groceries and flowers, apologizing again for the inconvenience and assuring her that everything would be back to normal soon. The bank manager said this kind of thing happens more often than you'd think, I told her over dinner. Apparently, our account restructuring last year triggered some kind of delayed review. I hate dealing with banks, she said. Thank God you handle all of that. I don't mind, I replied. I like taking care of you. 3 days later, Nora tried to withdraw money from an ATM and discovered that her access to all of our accounts had been suspended. She came home pale and shaken, clutching a handful of receipts showing 0 available balances. Elliot, she said, her voice tight with controlled panic. We need to talk. There's no money, Nora said, spreading the ATM receipts across our kitchen table like evidence in a criminal trial. None of our accounts show any available funds. I looked at the receipts with appropriate concern, frowning as if seeing this information for the first time. That can't be right. Let me call the bank again. I already called them, she said quickly. They said I'm not authorized to access account information anymore. What do you mean, not authorized? They're joint accounts. That's what I told them. Her hands were shaking slightly as she gathered the receipts back into a neat pile. But according to their records, I was removed from all accounts 3 months ago. I sat down across from her, letting confusion and concern play across my face. That's impossible. I never authorized anything like that. The representative said you did. She said you restructured everything in December for tax purposes. The paperwork, I said slowly, as if pieces were falling into place. Remember all those documents our accountant wanted us to sign? Maybe there was something in there I didn't understand. Nora stared at me for a long moment. You're saying this was an accident? I don't know what I'm saying. Let me call our accountant and figure out what happened. I made the call from the kitchen while Nora paced in the living room. The conversation was brief and entirely fictional, but it served its purpose. Okay, I said when I hung up. I think I understand what happened. The account restructuring was supposed to be temporary, just for the tax year, but apparently some of the changes weren't reversed when they should have been. So this is fixable? Absolutely. It'll just take some time to straighten out all the paperwork. Relief flooded her face. How much time? A few weeks, maybe a month. You know how slow banks can be with this kind of thing. A month? The relief vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Elliot, we have bills to pay. The mortgage, the car payments, utilities. What are we supposed to do for a month? We'll figure it out, I said calmly. I can set up new temporary accounts in my name to cover our expenses. It's not ideal, but it's manageable. But what about me? I can't access any money at all? I'll make sure you have everything you need, I promised. Cash for groceries, gas money, whatever you need. Think of it as an allowance until we get this mess sorted out. An allowance. The word hung in the air between us, and I watched Nora process its implications. For the first time in our marriage, she was completely financially dependent on my goodwill. I should probably look for a job more seriously, she said after a moment, just in case this takes longer to resolve than we expect. That's not a bad idea, I agreed, though it might be difficult to find something quickly that pays enough to make a real difference. She nodded, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was calculating expenses, considering options, beginning to understand just how precarious her position had become. That night, she called Lucas in a panic. We have a problem, she said, pacing our bedroom while I pretended to sleep. All of our accounts are frozen, some kind of banking error, but it could take weeks to fix. I couldn't hear Lucas's response, but Nora's half of the conversation told me everything I needed to know. I can't access any money at all. Elliot's handling everything, but I'm completely dependent on him right now. No, I can't move out until this gets resolved. I have no way to pay for an apartment or even a hotel. I know we had plans, but this changes everything. There was a long pause. What do you mean, maybe this is a sign? A sign of what? No, I don't think he knows about us. He's being completely supportive about the separation. This is just terrible timing. Of course I still want to be with you, but I need to be practical about this. Another pause, shorter this time. Don't say that. This isn't about choosing him over you. It's about not ending up homeless. I love you too. We just need to be patient a little longer. She hung up and sat on the edge of the bed for several minutes, staring at her phone. I could feel the weight of her disappointment and frustration, the crushing realization that her carefully laid plans had hit an unexpected obstacle. When she finally slipped under the covers, she curled up against me with a desperation I hadn't felt from her in months. Everything's going to be okay, I whispered into her hair. I'll take care of everything. I know, she whispered back. I'm lucky to have you. Lucky. Yes, she was very lucky indeed. The next few weeks were educational for both of us. Nora learned what it meant to have no financial independence, to need permission for every purchase, to justify every expense to someone else. I learned just how quickly desperation could transform a person's behavior. She became attentive in ways she hadn't been in years. She cooked my favorite meals, asked about my day with genuine interest, and stopped mentioning separation or divorce. She also started job hunting with real urgency, though her lack of recent work experience and the limited opportunities in our small town made the process frustrating. I had an interview at the insurance office downtown, she told me one evening in early April. It's just a receptionist position, but it's something. How did it go? Well, I think, but they're only offering $12 an hour and it's part-time. Even if I get it, that's barely enough to cover gas and groceries. Every little bit helps, I said encouragingly. And it would be good for you to get back into the workforce. She nodded, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. $12 an hour, 20 hours a week, maybe $300 after taxes, not nearly enough to support herself independently, not nearly enough to leave me. Meanwhile, Lucas was growing impatient with the delays. Their text conversations, which I continued to monitor, were becoming increasingly tense. "This is taking too long," he'd written. "Either you want to be with me or you don't." "It's not that simple," she'd replied. "I can't just walk away with nothing. I told you I'd help support you until you get back on your feet." For how long? A month? 6 months? A year? I need to be realistic about this. What happened to taking risks for love? What happened to choosing happiness over security? I'm trying to be smart about this, for both of us. It feels like you're making excuses. Their relationship was fracturing under the pressure of reality, and I was fascinated to watch it happen. Lucas had been confident and charming when he was the exciting secret, the forbidden thrill that made Nora feel alive. But as a practical solution to her problems, he was proving inadequate. May arrived with warmer weather and blooming flowers, but no resolution to Nora's financial situation. The banking error was proving remarkably persistent, requiring additional documentation and review periods that kept stretching the timeline. "I spoke to the bank manager again today," I told her over dinner. "He's optimistic that we'll have everything resolved by the end of the month." "Really?" Hope flickered in her eyes. "Really? I know this has been frustrating, but we're almost through it." "I got the job at the insurance office," she said. "I start Monday." "That's wonderful. I'm proud of you for sticking with it." She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in weeks. "It feels good to have something of my own again, even if it's not much." Something of her own. The irony was delicious. Her first paycheck was a reality check that hit harder than she'd expected. After taxes and deductions, she brought home $247 for 2 weeks of work. It was barely enough to cover her personal expenses, let alone contribute meaningfully to our household budget. "I knew it wouldn't be much," she said, staring at the check, "but seeing it in black and white is depressing." "It's a start," I reminded her, "and once we get the banking situation resolved, this will just be extra income." But we both knew that wasn't true. This job wasn't extra income. It was a lifeline that wasn't nearly strong enough to pull her to safety. Lucas knew it too. Their relationship had devolved into arguments about commitment and practicality, with each of them accusing the other of changing the terms of their arrangement. "You said you wanted to build a life together," Nora had texted him after a particularly heated phone conversation. "I do. But I didn't sign up to support someone else's wife indefinitely while she figures out whether she actually wants to leave her husband. That's not fair. You know this situation is temporary." "Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're getting comfortable with the status quo." "The status quo is me working a minimum wage job while my husband controls every penny I have access to. How is that comfortable?" "Then do something about it. File for divorce and demand your fair share. It's not that simple. It is that simple. You're just afraid to do it." She didn't respond to that text, and Lucas didn't send another one for 3 days. When he finally did, it was a single line. "Let me know when you decide what you actually want." June brought our wedding anniversary and a gift I'd been planning for months. 15 years, I said, raising my wine glass across the table at the expensive restaurant where we'd had our first date. "Who would have thought we'd make it this far?" "It's been quite a journey," Nora replied, clinking her glass against mine. "I have something for you," I said, pulling out a small wrapped box. Her face lit up with surprise and something that might have been guilt. "Elliot, you shouldn't have. I didn't get you anything." "Your company is gift enough," I said, which was truer than she could possibly understand. Inside the box was a key. "What's this for?" she asked, turning it over in her hand. "A safety deposit box," I explained. I've been thinking about what you said regarding wanting something of your own. So I opened an account in your name and put some money aside for you, just in case you ever need it. Tears filled her eyes. How much money? Enough to give you options, I said vaguely. I know things have been tight lately with the banking situation, and I wanted you to know that you're not trapped. If you ever decide you need space or time to figure things out, you have the resources to do that. She reached across the table and took my hand. I don't deserve you. You deserve to be happy, I replied, whatever that looks like. The safety deposit box contained $5,000 in cash and a letter I'd written months earlier. The letter explained everything: how long I'd known about her affair, how carefully I'd documented her deception, how thoroughly I'd restructured our finances to protect myself from her planned betrayal. But Nora wouldn't discover that until she was desperate enough to use the key. July passed quietly, with Nora settling into the routine of her part-time job and the reality of her limited options. She'd stopped mentioning divorce or separation entirely, focusing instead on small improvements to our daily life together. She planted a garden in our backyard, organized our closets, and started cooking more elaborate meals. To an outside observer, we might have looked like a couple working through their problems and coming out stronger on the other side. Lucas had a different perspective. "You're never going to leave him," he'd written in what would turn out to be his final text message to her. "You've had 6 months to figure this out, and you keep finding excuses to stay. I'm done waiting for you to find the courage to choose the life you say you want." "Please don't do this," she'd replied immediately. "I love you. I just need more time." Time for what? For your husband to fix the banking error that's been going on for 4 months? For your part-time job to magically start paying enough to support you? For me to be okay with being your secret indefinitely? It's not indefinite. As soon as I can access our accounts again, I'll have the money I need to leave. And what if that never happens? What if there is no banking error? What if your husband knows exactly what's going on and is playing a much smarter game than either of us realized? There was no response to that message. Lucas had finally asked the question that Nora had been trying not to think about for months. 3 days later, she used the key. I was in my workshop when Nora came home from the bank, her face pale and her hands shaking as she clutched a manila envelope. Through the window, I watched her sit in her car for several minutes before getting out, and I knew she'd finally opened the safety deposit box. She found me sanding a piece of oak that would eventually become a bookshelf for our living room. Domestic projects had become my hobby over the past few months, a way to demonstrate my commitment to building our life together while she'd been planning to tear it apart. "We need to talk," she said from the doorway. I looked up from my work, taking in her appearance with carefully calibrated concern. "You look upset. What's wrong?" She held up the envelope. I opened the safety deposit box. "Oh, good. Did the money help with whatever you needed?" "There was a letter, Elliot." I set down my sandpaper and gave her my full attention. "What kind of letter?" "You know what kind of letter." Her voice was steady, but I could see the effort it was taking to maintain control. "The question is how long you've known." "Known what?" She pulled out my letter and read the first line aloud. "Dear Nora, by the time you read this, you'll have realized that I've known about your affair with Lucas Reed since February." The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire that had been burning for months. I waited for her to continue. "February," she repeated. "You've known since February." "Yes." The banking error, the account restructuring, the job hunting and the allowance and the anniversary dinner, all of it was planned. "Yes." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her replaying the past 6 months through this new lens, understanding for the first time that she hadn't been managing the situation. She'd been managed. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why what? Why did I find out? Or why didn't I confront you immediately? Why didn't you just divorce me when you found the first text?" I leaned against my workbench and considered the question. Because I wanted to understand what I was dealing with. A moment of weakness, a full-blown affair, or something else entirely. And what did you conclude? That you'd been planning to leave me for months. That you'd been performing the role of concerned wife while building a case for divorce. That you saw me as an obstacle to your happiness rather than a partner worth fighting for. Her composure finally cracked. So you decided to destroy my life instead? I decided to protect myself from someone who was planning to destroy mine. By trapping me here? By making me completely dependent on you? By making sure you understood the reality of your situation before you made any irreversible decisions. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. The reality of my situation? The reality is that my husband has been lying to me for 6 months while pretending to be supportive and understanding. The reality, I corrected, is that my wife has been lying to me for over a year while pretending to be faithful and committed. I just got better at the game than you did. This isn't a game, Elliot. This is our marriage. No, Nora, our marriage ended the first time you slept with Lucas. Everything since then has been an elaborate performance by both of us. She sank into the old chair I kept in the corner of the workshop, the envelope still clutched in her hands. What happens now? That depends on what you want to happen. What I want? She looked up at me with something that might have been hope. I want to go back to February and make different choices. That's not an option. Then I want to leave. I want to take my share of our assets and start over somewhere else. What assets would those be? The hope died in her eyes as she processed the implications of my question. The house, the savings, the retirement accounts, everything we built together. Everything I built while you were building a relationship with another man. I'm entitled to half of our marital assets, regardless of what I did wrong. Are you? I pulled out my phone and opened the folder where I'd stored months of evidence. Let's see what a judge would think about your entitlement. I showed her the photos first. Nora and Lucas entering the motel, Nora and Lucas at restaurants, Nora and Lucas walking hand in hand through a park 2 towns over. Then the receipts. Hotel rooms charged to our joint credit card. Expensive dinners for 2 while I was working late. Gas station purchases far from our home, always on days when she'd claimed to be at the gym or running errands. Finally, the text messages. Months of them, documenting not just the physical affair but the emotional betrayal, the planning, the casual dismissal of our marriage as something that had run its course. This is what a judge would see, I said when she'd finished looking through everything. A woman who spent over a year systematically deceiving her husband while using his resources to fund her affair. How much of our marital assets do you think you'd be entitled to then? She was crying now, silent tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. You hate me. I don't hate you, Nora. I'm disappointed in you. I'm angry at you. But I don't hate you. Then why are you doing this to me? Because you did it to yourself. Every choice you made, every lie you told, every moment you spent with him while pretending to love me, those were your decisions. I'm just making sure you face the consequences of them. What about forgiveness? What about working through our problems together? You had a year to work through our problems. Instead, you worked through them with Lucas. She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. So, what's your plan? Keep me trapped here forever? Make me live like a prisoner in my own home? My plan is to give you the same choice you were planning to give me, just with better information. What choice? You can stay married to me, accept that I know everything, and we can try to rebuild something honest from the wreckage. Or you can leave, knowing that you'll be doing it with nothing but what you can earn on your own. That's not a choice. That's an ultimatum. It's the same ultimatum you were planning to give me, just from a position of strength instead of weakness. She was quiet for several minutes, staring out the window at the garden she'd planted, at the life she'd been planning to abandon. What about Lucas? She asked finally. What about him? If I stay, I'd have to end things with him completely. You'd have to end things with him anyway. He already ended them with you. She turned to look at me, confusion replacing some of the anger in her expression. I showed her Lucas's final text messages, the ones where he'd accused her of being too afraid to leave me, where he'd suggested that maybe I knew more than either of them realized. He figured it out before you did, I said, and he decided you weren't worth the complication. He was just frustrated. He meant every word. Lucas wanted the excitement of an affair, not the responsibility of a relationship. When things got difficult, he bailed. She read through the messages again, and I watched her face as she absorbed the casual cruelty of his dismissal. He said he loved me. He said a lot of things. The question is whether you believed them or whether you just wanted to believe them. I did love him. Maybe, but you loved the idea of him more than you loved the reality. The idea of someone who thought you were exciting and spontaneous and worth taking risks for. The reality was someone who expected you to take all the risks while he enjoyed the benefits. And what are you expecting? Honesty. Complete honesty about everything that happened, everyone you talked to, every lie you told. If we're going to try to rebuild this marriage, it has to be on a foundation of truth. And if I can't do that, then you can't do that. But you'll be doing it somewhere else, with whatever you can earn at $12 an hour. She sat back down, the fight going out of her as the full scope of her situation became clear. You really have thought of everything. I've had 6 months to think about it. 6 months of pretending to love me while planning my destruction. 6 months of actually loving you while protecting myself from your plans for my destruction. She looked up at me with surprise. You still love me? I love the woman I married. I don't know who you've become, but I'm willing to find out if you're willing to be honest about it. And if I'm not? If I decide I can't live with someone who manipulated me for 6 months, regardless of what I did to deserve it? Then you'll discover what it's really like to start over with nothing. No safety net, no support system, no one to blame but yourself for the choices that got you there. She was quiet for a long time, turning the key to the safety deposit box over and over in her hands. How do I know you won't do this again? She asked eventually. How do I know that if we rebuild this marriage, you won't spend years planning some other elaborate revenge for some other perceived betrayal? Because this wasn't revenge, Nora. This was justice. There's a difference. Explain it to me. Revenge would have been destroying you immediately, publicly, without giving you any chance to understand or change. Justice is making sure you face the natural consequences of your choices while still giving you the opportunity to choose differently. And you think forcing me to be financially dependent on you is justice? I think experiencing the vulnerability you were planning to inflict on me is educational. She stood up again, walking to the door of the workshop and then back to the chair. I need time to think about this. Take all the time you need. But understand that some opportunities have expiration dates. What does that mean? It means that my willingness to rebuild this marriage isn't unlimited. If you spend the next 6 months trying to figure out how to get around the consequences of your actions instead of dealing with them, you might find that the option to stay is no longer available. How long do I have? As long as it takes for you to decide whether you want to be married to me or not. But I won't wait indefinitely for you to choose between me and a relationship that's already over. She nodded slowly, understanding that this conversation was ending, but that the larger negotiation was just beginning. Can I ask you something? She said as she reached the door. Of course. If I had come to you in February and told you the truth about Lucas, told you I was unhappy and wanted to work on our marriage, what would you have done? I considered the question carefully. I would have been hurt. I would have been angry. But I would have tried to understand what went wrong and how we could fix it. And now, Now I know that you're capable of lying to me for over a year while planning to abandon me. That changes things. Changes them how? It means that trust, once rebuilt, will be conditional. It means that transparency won't be optional. It means that you'll have to prove, every day, that you're choosing this marriage instead of just settling for it. And if I can't live with those conditions, then you can't live with those conditions. But you'll be living with them somewhere else. She left the workshop without another word, and I went back to sanding my piece of oak. Through the window, I watched her walk to her car and sit there for another 10 minutes, staring at her phone. She didn't call Lucas. She didn't call Madison or any of her other friends. She just sat there, finally understanding that she was completely alone with the consequences of her choices. It was the most honest moment we'd shared in over a year. 3 days passed before Nora spoke to me about anything more substantial than the weather or what we needed from the grocery store. She went to work, came home, made dinner, and retreated to the guest bedroom where she'd been sleeping since our confrontation in the workshop. I gave her space to process, but I also watched her carefully. She didn't try to contact Lucas, didn't make any calls to lawyers or friends. She seemed to be genuinely considering her options rather than looking for ways around them. On Thursday evening, she found me in the living room reading a book about woodworking techniques. "I want to ask you some questions," she said, settling into the chair across from my spot on the couch. "Okay. If I decide to try to make this marriage work, what would that actually look like? Day to day, I mean. It would look like us learning to be honest with each other. It would look like rebuilding trust gradually, with clear expectations and boundaries." "What kind of boundaries?" "Complete transparency about where you go, who you talk to, what you do with your time, access to your phone, your email, your social media accounts. No more secrets." "For how long?" "For as long as it takes for me to believe that you're committed to this marriage instead of just trapped in it." She nodded slowly. "What about my job?" "What about it?" "Would I keep working, or would you expect me to quit and be financially dependent on you permanently?" "I'd expect you to keep working. Not because we need the money, but because you need the independence. Part of what went wrong between us was that you felt like you didn't have your own identity outside of being my wife, but you'd still control the major financial decisions. Until trust is rebuilt, yes. You used our joint resources to fund your affair, Nora. That can't happen again. And if I wanted to go back to school, or start a business, or make some other major life change, we'd discuss it like married partners should. If it made sense and you could demonstrate that it was about building our life together rather than building an exit strategy, I'd support it." She was quiet for several minutes, and I could see her weighing the implications of what I was describing. "It sounds like parole," she said finally. "It sounds like marriage with someone who's proven they can't be trusted unconditionally. And you think that's sustainable long-term?" "I think it's more sustainable than the alternative." "Which is?" "You leaving with nothing and trying to build a life from scratch. Or me filing for divorce and making sure everyone knows exactly why our marriage ended." She flinched at the second option. "You'd really do that? Publicly humiliate me?" "I'd really present the facts and let people draw their own conclusions. That would destroy my reputation in this town. Your choices would destroy your reputation. I'd just make sure people knew what those choices were." "That's cruel." "What's cruel is spending over a year lying to someone who loves you while planning to abandon them. What I'm offering is a consequence, not cruelty." She got up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where we'd lived together for 8 years. "What about forgiveness?" she asked. "Real forgiveness, not just this conditional arrangement you're describing." "Forgiveness isn't the same thing as trust, Nora. I can forgive you for what you did and still protect myself from you doing it again. But you don't forgive me." "Not really. I'm trying to, but forgiveness is a process, not a moment, and it requires genuine remorse from the person being forgiven." You don't think I'm genuinely remorseful? I think you're genuinely sorry that you got caught. I think you're genuinely frightened about your future, but I'm not sure you're genuinely remorseful about betraying me. She turned back to face me. What would genuine remorse look like to you? It would look like you taking full responsibility for your choices without making excuses or blaming me for driving you to them. It would look like you understanding that rebuilding our marriage is a privilege you'd have to earn, not a right you're entitled to. It would look like you being grateful for the opportunity to try again instead of resentful about the conditions. And if I can't do that? Then you can't do that. You keep saying that, like it's some kind of mantra. It's not a mantra. It's an acknowledgement that I can't force you to want what I'm offering. I can only make sure you understand what your alternatives are. She sat back down, this time on the couch next to me, instead of in the separate chair. I miss him, she said quietly. I know. Does that make you angry? It makes me sad, but it doesn't surprise me. Why not? Because you invested over a year of your emotional life in that relationship. Those feelings don't just disappear because the relationship is over. Do you think they'll fade? I think they'll change. Whether they fade depends on what you replace them with. And what would I replace them with? That's up to you. You could replace them with resentment toward me for ending your affair. You could replace them with fantasy about what might have been. Or you could replace them with investment in what actually is. What actually is? A marriage to someone who knows the worst thing you've ever done and is still willing to try to love you. She was crying again, but quietly this time, without the desperation I'd seen in the workshop. I don't know if I can do this, she said. Do what? Live with someone who sees me the way you see me now. How do I see you now? Like I'm broken, like I'm someone who can't be trusted, like I'm a problem you're trying to solve instead of a person you love. I set down my book and turned to face her fully. Nora, you are someone who can't be trusted. Not yet. That's not a judgment. It's a fact based on your behavior over the past year. But broken? No, I don't see you as broken. Then how do you see me? I see you as someone who made terrible choices for understandable reasons. I see you as someone who got lost and is trying to find her way back. I see you as someone who's capable of being better than she's been, if she's willing to do the work. What if I'm not capable of being better? Then we'll find that out together. But I'd rather find it out while trying than find it out while giving up. She leaned against me, and I put my arm around her for the first time in months. I'm scared, she said. Of what? Of trying and failing. Of you never really forgiving me. Of spending years trying to earn back something that's already gone. Those are all reasonable fears. But you think I should try anyway? I think you should try if you want to try. Not because you're afraid of the alternatives, but because you actually want to rebuild something with me. How do I know the difference? You'll know. When you stop thinking about what you're losing and start thinking about what you might gain. We sat like that for a while, not talking, just existing in the same space without pretense or performance for the first time in over a year. I want to try, she said eventually. Are you sure? No, but I want to try anyway. Okay. What happens next? Next, we start over. We introduce ourselves to each other as the people we actually are, instead of the people we've been pretending to be. I don't know who I actually am anymore. Then we'll figure that out too. She pulled back to look at me. Do you think we can really do this? Rebuild something real from all this mess? I think we can try. Whether we succeed depends on whether we're both willing to be honest about what we want and what we're willing to sacrifice to get it. What are you willing to sacrifice? My need to be right, my desire for revenge, my fear of being vulnerable with someone who's hurt me. What do you want me to sacrifice? Your fantasy about who you thought you were, your resentment about facing consequences, your need to be the victim in this story. That's a lot. It is. But the alternative is sacrificing any chance of having a real marriage with anyone, ever. Because of my reputation, you mean? Because of your character. If you can't face what you've done and learn from it, you'll just do it again with someone else. She nodded, understanding finally that this wasn't just about our marriage. It was about who she wanted to be as a person. I need to call Lucas, she said. Why? To end things properly. To tell him I'm choosing to stay married and work on my relationship with you. He already ended things, Nora. There's nothing left to end. There's closure. There's taking responsibility for my part in what happened instead of just letting it fade away. I considered this. What would you say to him? That I'm sorry for leading him on when I wasn't really ready to leave my marriage. That I take responsibility for the confusion and hurt I caused. That I hope he finds someone who can give him what he's looking for. And if he tries to talk you out of staying with me, then I'll tell him that's not his decision to make. Okay, but I want to be there when you make the call. You don't trust me to handle it appropriately? I don't trust either of you to handle it appropriately. Too much has happened between you for a private conversation to be a good idea. She nodded reluctantly. Fair enough. The call lasted less than 5 minutes. Lucas was cold and dismissive, clearly having moved on from whatever he'd felt for her. Nora handled it with more dignity than I'd expected, taking responsibility for her role in the situation without making excuses or asking for understanding. When she hung up, she looked relieved, rather than sad. How do you feel? I asked, like I just woke up from a very long, very complicated dream. Any regrets? About ending it? No. About starting it? More than I can count. That night she moved back into our bedroom, not because everything was forgiven or forgotten, but because we'd agreed to try building something honest from the wreckage of what we'd both destroyed. It would take months of difficult conversations, therapy sessions, and careful rebuilding of trust. There would be setbacks and moments when we both wondered if we were trying to resurrect something that was better left buried. But for the first time in over a year, we were both committed to finding out what was possible when two people decided to tell each other the truth about who they really were and what they actually wanted. It wasn't the marriage we'd started with, and it wasn't the marriage either of us had imagined. But it was honest, and it was ours, and it was built on a foundation of reality instead of fantasy.